There are a lot of established and memorable characters in the Twisted Metal franchise, even if it took them a while to become what they are known as now. Today, I wanted to look at the opposite side of the greats and see the ones that failed, having potential to become a very interesting piece of this series' history, but were unfortunately implemented poorly. Maybe they could have been utilized in a more engaging or memorable way, just sadly having their good concept being thrown right into the garbage. So we're going to lay them out and take a look at these characters and see what could have been done to make them better, or in some cases it's a little bit deeper than that, which we will get to when we get to it. I hope you enjoy. Our first character is a boss, and when you look at the Twisted Metal bosses, the final ones never really made much sense to me as a tournament end, for the most part at least. Minion from Twisted Metal 1 is the previous year's winner from that game, sure, but why is he the final boss? Did Calypso want the Apocalypse 9 gang to head up the tournament? Because this was before he became the demon minion, so I don't really know what's going on here. Darktooth is a nice aesthetic boss for Twisted Metal 2, but why did Calypso want to put Sweet Tooth's father as the final boss? I get Yellow Jacket, who is Sweet Tooth's dad, was granted the ability for him to drive forever. But I took that more as him recruiting drivers and not heading up the tournament. Plus, if you want to get into the nitty gritty here, Outlaw is considered the canonical winner of the first game, so how could Sweet Tooth's dad become the head of the tournament if he's dead? In Twisted Metal 4, you kill Sweet Tooth as the final boss, but you also see him in the ending, so are there two Sweet Teeth, or is Melvin driving it? I really don't know what to make of this. Warhawk in black sort of makes sense because it's the police wanting you to die, so it's reasonable enough. For the rest of the titles, this same sentiment goes on. Calypso just picked a random person to head up his tournament as the Kingpin. The only boss throughout the entire franchise that makes rational sense to me is from the game which has the objectively worst drivers and lore in the entire series, Twisted Metal 3. Primeval is the final boss of this game, where you battle this monstrosity inside of Calypso's blimp. The pre-fight is also pretty interesting, having the mechanic of blowing up 5 boxes, then a big box, so the enemies stop infinitely respawning. Or you can just turbo ram the big box and shoot it when the level starts and destroy it because of a bug. Whichever way you decide to do it, when the boss spawns in, you'll see aesthetically Primeval is a really good design. He's much larger than you, the sound of his engine is obnoxious, so when you're being chased, it can be quite intimidating. His special weapon is some skulls and ninja stars that toss you around the entire level. Primeval just checks all the boxes of being a good boss. He's not too annoying or too easy when fighting him legitimately. We are unfortunately not given any more information about him, like who this driver is that looks like a dried up clay face that was flattened by a steamroller. All Calypso tells us is how he's not as friendly as all the other contestants have been, which you can take that for what you will. Thankfully, we do have a way to figure something else out aside from this. When you open up the manual, there is a small tidbit of information about each character. Even Darkseid, which I know this isn't about Primeval, but I need to read this because of how cringe it is. It states, play chicken with this Mac Daddy and you'll be scraping yourself off the side of the road. Mr. Ash has entered the contest to throw his weight around Washington, D.C. and ruffle your feathers with his bad attitude. His special weapon is the Freeze Flamethrower because simply freezing or burning your sissy butt wouldn't satisfy this guy. And don't forget, that's Mr. Ash to you. At least this confirms it's Mr. Ash from Twisted Metal 1. But more importantly here, there is a piece on Primeval saying, Primeval is the mightiest of Calypso's demon henchmen. He is the guardian of the big guy's blimp and the boss of the level. He is highly maneuverable, his special weapon is incredibly powerful, and he has access to all special weapons in the game. Primeval's vehicle surrounds him with a roll cage, so he's not afraid to take a tumble. Outside of the manual outright lying to us about what Primeval does, he does not shoot everyone special in the game, so I don't know what that's about, but it does give us a small understanding of who this character actually is, the mightiest demon Calypso has at his disposal, which makes me stop and think, like, what the fuck? Like, this is Calypso's tournament, right? So why is Twisted Metal 3 the only game that actually has one of his soldiers, teammates, friends, whatever you want to call them, as the final boss? Looking at this from a story perspective of even other titles, as I said earlier about Twisted Metal 2, like, why is Sweet Tooth's father the final boss? It would make more sense if Darktooth was this animalistic, possessed version of Sweet Tooth that Calypso created, hence why Sweet Tooth is not playable by default. They could have made an interesting little situation there, then had Sweet Tooth unlocked after finishing the tournament once, since you're freeing up the poor clown from his demonic transition, but instead it's just his dad. Like, are we playing through a tournament or an episode of Jerry Springer? If we swap back over to Primeval, the overall vibe of him is honestly a very unique one we haven't seen before. There was actually an attempt of a setup here. You fight Calypso's head demon in the blimp where you get your wish from. When you break out the TI-83, everything starts to add up. Like, how was this not iterated upon more in this game or even a future title? I would have loved to have seen Calypso be more than a long-haired genie in the games. Unfortunately, we don't really have anything else to go off of here except from looking at the vibe that was being built, which I think is pretty cool if we were able to actually learn more about Calypso and learn about his people and how he is, if he's an asshole to them, like what's going on there. Some may ask how this is a failed potential character, but do I really need to answer that? Like, watch any ending in this game and I think your question will be answered. The best way this could have been played out was if Primeval was a playable character outside of a GameShark code. Give him some sort of ending with him taking the reins over Calypso and like crushes his skull into dust or something. That would have been an interesting avenue to play off of, even if it's just similar to the Twisted Metal 2 Minion ending. The entire situation would be more personal considering how Primeval is Calypso's right-hand man. It really does shock me how not a single other game in this franchise even attempted utilizing this interesting piece laid down by Primeval. If there were ever to be another game, I hope he returns and is done much better. It just pisses me off seeing potential this good being thrown right down the toilet. It would have been nice to see Calypso be fleshed out more aside from what we saw with Grasshopper and Twisted Metal 2, since he is a staple character in this franchise, but unfortunately no one ever decided to take the move. Our next character is one that could have been one of the most enticing, fun concepts in this whole series, judging on how Cousin Eddie is said to be in Head-On. As I'm sure you're aware, Cousin Eddie is the midpoint boss of Twisted Metal Head-On, essentially being a diet minion from Twisted Metal Black. You fight some ATVs as a pre-fight, maybe it's to hype you up, possibly to give you some upgrades before the battle, as if the player needed it. Afterwards, Edward will break out of his tomb, ready to fight the player, driving around, shooting his flamethrower all over the place. You're expected to kill all the redneck hicks on the sides of his mobile home. This is made exceptionally easy because you can just freeze him and then shoot whichever ones you have left over. The only one that could be considered annoying is his top weak spot, which requires a napalm to deal damage to. After this, you go into the quote final battle, which I use very loosely since this fight is not hard whatsoever. You can just mow him down until he's dead, unlocking your ultimate character. It's sort of a random boss, which we get a better understanding of why when we play through his tournament mode, after you get to experience this awful character in totality. Like, seriously, this character is abhorrent. The game blatantly lies to us about what his armor is. The non-upgraded special barely functions, and it's quite disgusting, to be frank. Just an awful character right here. His ending allows us to see Cousin Eddie is a bumbling idiot who wasn't even invited to the tournament in the first place, grabbing Calypso by his throat, choking him, wishing for a new mobile home, which he drools over and leaves with. If we reel it back for a second, similar to what we were talking about with Primeval, why is Cousin Eddie even a boss? Calypso is making these tournaments, which is why the entire situation with Primeval was logical, with him being Calypso's right-hand man and all. So in Head-On, Calypso decided to make a person who was not invited to the tournament a boss? Like, for what reason? To me, this is wrong in so many ways. It just doesn't really make much sense, and I think there's a much better alternative for how Cousin Eddie should have played out. If we take what this game gave us with Eddie's ending, this could be transformed into a completely different and unique idea rather than whatever this choice was, leaning more in the direction of not being invited. He shouldn't be a boss. No one wants him here, mainly Calypso in this case. So instead, if they made him come in randomly throughout the tournament, that would make a lot more sense to his character and allow for a more chaotic playthrough of this game, essentially being a random encounter. You would never know when he's going to come in. He could come in every other level or not at all, tossing a wrench into the mix, keeping the player on their toes, assuming he kept all of his boss attributes. With how easy Twisted Metal Head-On is, that would have been a very fun and engaging way to have Cousin Eddie implemented into the game, being a completely new feature to the series, never done before or after. I feel like this would also excuse the laziness of Cousin Eddie as well. It does feel shitty to be fighting a boss that is exactly like the one you fought in Twisted Metal Black. Same system, same special weapon. If he was a random character, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, since the overall addition of him to the tournament would just be very unique here. Whenever I ask someone about Cousin Eddie, all they ever associate him with is a bad minion or an awful playable character. Executing him this way would have been a much better idea in my eyes. It could have created more memorable runs of this game, since you'll never know when he comes in, allowing for players to be cautious, think about how many weapons they have, what in their arsenal they could need to take him out whenever he comes. It's a missed opportunity of a very fun dynamic. I would definitely associate him with a more interesting and unique take on the series, adding a pushback to Twisted Metal Head-On, mainly Extra Twisted Edition in this case, which needed it very badly, but with the way he was handled, I will always view Cousin Eddie as a diet minion. Our third character is from Twisted Metal Small Brawl, which isn't really story related since the overall aura is just non-existent here in the story or world building department. It's a game made for kids, so what do you expect? This is actually more lore filled from David Goodrich, who worked on the game. When I was informed of how Piecemeal was actually supposed to be implemented, it made me more frustrated with the final boss fight due to how interesting the idea would be for this series overall. When you look at Piecemeal here, playable or not, it comes off as a very weird character, a boss that steals the special weapon of an enemy, which is not even unique for the game, by the way, since Mime has the exact same one. I just never felt like this was final boss worthy, and that's because it wasn't supposed to be. To my understanding, Minion was going to be the final boss of Twisted Metal Small Brawl, but Sony didn't like that character as the final boss, so due to the classic 540 no time, Piecemeal was stuck in as the final boss. They just increased his size and called it a day. I do believe Goodrich still has a concept of Minion. Previously, he told me it was going to be a similar design to Black, that being the gas truck with a little flamethrower on it, which may have been a questionable thing if that were to be executed. Like, imagine Twisted Metal Black, Small Brawl, and Head-On have what is essentially the same exact boss. We would be in a very over-redundant situation, that's for sure. But the thing that I was informed on that really perked me up the most was the ideology behind Piecemeal and how he would have been implemented into Small Brawl. The idea may shock you, but if you look at Piecemeal, you can see how it's a few random parts of characters from this game's roster, like Mime as the front of the centerpiece, Sweet Tooth as the base, Twister's spoiler on top. It's an amalgamation of a bunch of random characters, which also explains why Piecemeal uses the special of other cars. After unlocking Piecemeal from beating the game with Trapper on hard mode, and we check out the bio, it states, Piecemeal is a collector and scavenger. He fashions his huge car from pieces of RC cars he has defeated in Calypso's contest, which doesn't give us any information on him as a final boss, rather alluding to how originally Piecemeal was going to be a secret boss within the tournament mode. The player would go around finding all the parts to Piecemeal, essentially building this character up, and then you'd be required to fight him to unlock him, I'm assuming. Since this obviously was not implemented, I don't know how they would have had the player unlock Piecemeal. This explains the entire design of this character and the bio we have after unlocking him. When I first found this out, it did piss me off how this was not put into Small Brawl. One frustration I've had with Twisted Metal is over redundancy. There weren't really many risks taken, aside from Harbor City, which didn't even release. Tournament modes always played out exactly the same. There were no creative and fun elements tossed in outside of unlocking characters in Black, and of course they brought the same thing back in this game. That's why I said with Cousin Eddie it would have been really cool to have him come in randomly, since it would have been a new element to the series. Risks can obviously go poorly. If you look at Head-On with all those mini games, it was an interesting idea on paper, and that does get cookie points for attempting this. Unfortunately, they just executed those challenges very poorly. But this situation right here with Piecemeal is kind of hard to screw up. All you're doing is filling that childlike narrative. Like, a kid would see this as building a Lego set. And for anyone else who's not a kid, it would just be a fun and rewarding thing to do. Of course, depending on how hard the pieces would be to find, which judging on the creativity of Small Brawl's level design, I'm assuming the pieces would have been really hard to find. This would create replay value for the player on top of just being intriguing and unique. Instead, we are stuck with having a random boss that wasn't originally supposed to be there. Some may not call this failed, but I do, since the intention was completely different than what we got here. Just stuck as the final boss due to Sony not wanting Minion to be at the end. And those are some characters in this franchise that I found quite disappointing, executed poorly, or just failures in my eyes. They could have been done much better justice. Hopefully, if a new game releases, at least one of these characters' concepts returns, or the characters in general just come back. Primeval, Cousin Eddie, and Piecemeal could have been all remembered as much better characters overall. Primeval could have been one of the most unique and enticing bosses in the series from a story perspective. Cousin Eddie could have been an interesting spin on the formula, creating chaos throughout a playthrough, and Piecemeal could have been a really fun side mission for players to do while going through a tournament, finding all those pieces to unlock a secret character. But instead, all we got was the more unfortunate outcomes. Primeval is stuck in 989 land, where stories were not their strong suit. Cousin Eddie is a diet minion, and Piecemeal is turned final boss because Sony said no to their original idea with Minion. If I can find more characters that fit this bill, maybe I will make a part 2, but for now, that's all I have. If you have any characters of your own that you think were poorly executed, make sure to leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching to the end. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Also check out my other video on the Twisted Metal modding scene. It's been growing and getting better and better with time.